The Titanic. Just saying the name brings up all these images, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The huge ship, the iceberg, people scrambling.
Especially from that big movie, you know? That's the picture most of us have.
It really is. It's almost like a modern myth, really.
But here's the thing we wanted to dig into. What if that movie version, the one we all kind of know, isn't quite accurate?
Mm-hmm. What if the people who actually lived through it saw something, well, a bit different that night?
Exactly, and that's what this deep dive is all about today.
We've got these excerpts from survivor testimonies compiled in a transcript from a YouTube video. Really fascinating stuff.
So, yeah, the plan is to sort of push past the Hollywood gloss and find out what survivors actually said happened. Straight from them.
Let's do it. Where should we start? The impact.
Yeah, let's start there. The iceberg right ahead moment, the actual collision, that part happened, right?
Oh, definitely. The
Yeah.
lookouts saw it, just before 11:40 p.m. They tried to turn.
And in the film, it's this massive, like, shuddering impact. You almost feel it.
Right? Very dramatic. But listen to this survivor, Frank Apprentice. He described it quite differently.
How so?
He said there was no impact as such. More like slamming on your car brakes really hard.
Slamming on the brakes. That's much less violent than you'd think.
It really is. He even just said the ship stopped. And get this, some passengers apparently slept right through the whole thing.
Slipped through, hitting an iceberg. Wow.
It just shows how, for some people on board, that initial moment wasn't the huge jolt we imagine.
Okay, and the iceberg itself. The movie shows this colossal mountain of ice.
Yeah, well, Apprentice went out on deck afterwards. He said he only saw a little ice on the surface.
Just a little ice, so the real damage
Was all happening below the waterline, hidden. That huge 300-foot gash ripping open the hull, but silently out of sight.
So the impact maybe felt less dramatic, but the consequences were obviously catastrophic. Right, what about calling for help? The nearby ships.
Ah, yes. The movie really plays up the Carpathia racing to the rescue, which they did heroically.
But they weren't the only ship nearby, were they?
Not at all. That's a major simplification. There was the SS Californian.
Right, and it was much closer. How close are we talking?
Maybe only about 20 miles away. Possibly even less.
20 miles, that's incredibly close in the middle of the ocean.
It is. And there's quite a bit of evidence suggesting the Californian's crew actually saw the Titanic's distress rockets.
They saw the rockets, but didn't come.
That's the massive lingering question. Why didn't the Californian react? Why didn't they try to help? It's still debated today.
Chilling. Just chilling to think help might have been right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so while that mystery hangs there, let's go back to the Titanic itself. The lifeboats.
The famous women and children first protocol.
And the movie shows lifeboat number 7 being the first one lowered. That's accurate.
Yes, that aligns with the accounts. Lifeboat 7 was the first away.
Well, it wasn't a mad rush to get in, was it? At least not initially.
No, surprisingly not. That same survivor, Mr. Apprentice, he noticed women were actually hesitant to get into the boats.
Why? What was the hesitation?
Well, two main things he observed. First, imagine looking over the side. It's a 70-foot drop.
70 feet. Into the dark.
Yeah.
Onto the water. Yeah, okay, that's terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. And second, and this is crucial, many just didn't believe the Titanic could sink.
The unsinkable ship myth was that strong.
It really was. So to them, getting into this small, dangling lifeboat seemed riskier, maybe even pointless, compared to staying on the massive, solid deck of the Titanic.
That makes a strange kind of sense. A first-class passenger, Eloise Smith, she also said there wasn't much panic at first.
Right. Other accounts back that up. Sort of an eerie calm or disbelief in the beginning.
And maybe that's why some early boats left half empty.
That's definitely part of it. Plus, there was apparently some concern among the crew, maybe unfounded, that the lifeboats couldn't hold their full capacity, that they might buckle.
So fear of the drop, disbelief in the sinking, and worries about the boats themselves.
Seems like it. Lifeboat 7, for example, had capacity for 65, but left with only 27 people.
And nobody knew there weren't enough boats for everyone anyway.
Exactly. That horrifying fact wasn't common knowledge among the passengers.
Okay, switching gears a bit. The musicians. Such an iconic image, right?
Yeah.
Playing as the ship goes down.
Incredibly powerful, a symbol of, well, grace under pressure, I suppose.
And the accounts do confirm they played.
Yes, they certainly played for a good while after the collision, probably over 2 hours. The idea was clearly to try and keep people calm, maintain some sense of order.
But here's another twist. Some survivors said they never heard them.
That's true. There are accounts saying they never saw or heard the band at all.
How could that be?
Well, a couple of possibilities. Mr. Prentice suggested maybe people were just too panicked, too focused on, saving themselves to even notice the music.
That's plausible in that chaos.
Or maybe the band started playing later than the movie shows. Perhaps after some people were already in boats or further away on deck.
So different people experienced even that famous detail differently.
Exactly. It just shows how personal and fragmented experiences are during something like that.
Right. Okay, let's tackle a really difficult topic.
Right.
The third-class passengers. The movie often shows them being, well, locked below deck by cruel crew members.
Yes, that's a very common portrayal, and it's a really sensitive point.
What do the accounts say? Was that actually happening?
It's complex. The official British inquiry afterwards actually suggested there wasn't a formal policy to lock them down there.
Really? So why the much lower survival rate for third class?
The inquiry pointed to other factors, like reluctance to abandon their luggage, often everything they owned.
Ah, yeah, understandable.
And just the sheer difficulty of finding their way up. Their cabins were often at the very front or back of the ship, far from the main staircases to the boat deck. It was a maze down there.
So less deliberate cruelty, perhaps, and more tragic logistics and desperation.
That seems to be what the inquiry leaned towards, but it's important to add there are also survivor stories that counter the purely negative movie image. Well, there's an account from a Mrs. George Wabi who was in third class. She specifically mentioned brave crew members and even some first-class passengers helping her and others get up to the deck and into a lifeboat.
So acts of kindness and help were happening too.
Yes. It paints a more complicated picture than just heroes and villains. Human nature in crisis is rarely simple.
Definitely not. Okay, so the ship is going down, the water's rising. What were people hearing and seeing as the end approached?
Well, survivors described a progression of sounds. First, sort of pops and cracks as the structure started to groan and fail.
Like the ship was breaking apart slowly.
Initially, yes. Then, many reported a much bigger sound, a loud boom.
An explosion.
Some thought so. Or maybe a series of smaller explosions as the internal walls, the bulkheads, gave way under the water pressure. Others just described a deep, rumbling noise.
So the ship's integrity was just gone.
Pretty much. That immense pressure, especially in the middle, as the bow sank lower and lower.
And then pitch black. The lights went out.
Yes, at 2:01 a.m. Total darkness. Imagine that.
Unimaginable. And as the bow sank, the stern lifted higher and higher,
putting incredible, unbearable stress right on the midsection. And that's when it happened.
It broke in two.
It broke in two.
The movie shows that break happening way up in the air, almost vertical.
Yeah, very dramatic again. But finding the wreck in 1985 changed our understanding.
How so?
The evidence from the wreck suggests the break probably happened at a much lower angle. Closer to the waterline, maybe just below it.
Still, the tilt must have been extreme.
Oh, absolutely. Even at a lower angle, it became impossible to stand on the deck. People were just sliding off into the freezing water.
And before 1985, people didn't even agree it had broken.
It's incredible, isn't it? There are conflicting accounts. At least 8 survivors clearly said they saw it split. Emily Ryerson's description was vivid, like it was sliced in half with a knife.
But others insisted it sank whole.
Yes, a smaller group, but somehow their view became the more accepted one for decades. The idea of such a massive ship breaking apart was just almost too much to believe back then.
Which brings us back to the darkness you mentioned. How dark was it really?
Profoundly dark. The survivor accounts really stress this. One person said it was like being in a room with no light. You could maybe just make out shapes.
So if you were in a lifeboat,
you couldn't really see what was happening to the ship in its final moments. Not clearly. You'd hear things, horrifying things, but the visual was lost in the blackness.
And anyone close to the ship itself was probably just fighting to survive.
Right.
Not exactly observing.
Exactly. Either they were lost or their entire focus was just staying afloat, staying alive. Objective observation wasn't really possible.
Someone mentioned the 2012 TV series. Titanic did a bit better job showing the darkness.
Apparently so, yeah. Tried to capture that aspect more realistically. But even then, the accounts suggest the reality was probably even more terrifying, more disorienting.
So putting it all together, the impact wasn't always this huge jolt. The Californian was disturbingly close. People weren't initially desperate to get in the lifeboats.
Right. And the musicians, maybe not everyone heard them. The third-class experience was more nuanced than just locked gates.
And the breakup happened differently than we often see, at a lower angle, confirmed only decades later. And above all, that overwhelming absolute darkness.
It really highlights how survivor testimony, even when it conflicts or challenges the popular narrative, is so incredibly valuable. It adds layers, complexity.
It makes you think about memory, trauma, how stories get shaped over time, both by individuals and by, well, Hollywood.
Absolutely. And how adapting history for drama always involves choices, simplifications.
It definitely leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What other big historical events that we think we know so well? What untold stories with different perspectives are hiding just beneath the surface of the accepted version?
A very provocative thought to end on. Makes you want to keep digging.